And what the hell was Biden thinking when he declared Easter Sunday to be Trans Visibility Day? Such total disrespect to Christians, and November 5th is going to be called something else. You know, it's going to be called Christian Visibility Day, when Christians turn out in numbers that nobody has ever seen before.
Well, good morning, America. Morning glory. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you for joining me live inside the Beltway, joined by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin. Good morning, Senator. Were you happen to be at the Trump rally last night in Wisconsin?
Good morning, Hugh. Actually, I was. There's a lot of energy in the room. It's a typical Trump rally, filled with information, a lot of fun.
You know, that line about Christian Visibility Day is one of the funniest. Do you think that was offhand? He's got great timing sometimes. And, of course, the left is going to say, as my producer said, he's calling for a new crusade. But it was a heck of a funny line. Do you think he just came up with that?
I think it's entirely possible. I had the privilege, because I was down in Florida celebrating Easter with my children and grandchildren. And so I had the privilege of riding up to first Michigan and then to Green Bay with the president, sitting right next to him on Trump Force One. And it's just, I wish every American had that experience, to sit there and first of all talk to him about substantive issues for probably close to an hour, and then sit back and watch as his staff gathers around him, and they discuss a whole host of issues. And they would just see how engaging he is, how engaged he is, how competent he is, how funny he is. I think people get a completely different viewpoint of really who Donald Trump is, but you're seeing the real Donald Trump in these rallies. I mean, the guy is just entertaining. He's funny. Like I say, there's substance in those rallies, but there's a lot of good humor.
Senator Johnson, put you on the spot. Do you think that was a vice presidential interview that you were having on Trump Force One?
No, listen, he can't consider somebody like me for either vice president or a cabinet position. Yeah, I would be replaced by probably a Democrat senator. Or there's certainly be pretty high risk of doing that. So we can't afford to lose this Republican seat in the Senate.
You're right. Why would Governor Evers veto the bill that prohibits boys playing in girls' sports in high school? I just don't understand that. That's a 90-10 issue, Senator, isn't it?
Well, Hugh, that's like trying to understand radical leftism. He vetoed it because he's a radical leftist, as all Democrats are nowadays. This is not the Democrat Party as we were growing up, where we had some people with obviously different viewpoints on the economy, but there were rational Democrats back then. That's from yesteryear. So no, these people are radical leftists. What blows me away, for example, on the border, they know the border is a potent issue, and yet they're doing absolutely nothing to secure the border because they're so committed to an open border policy and flooding this country with illegal immigrants that'll pump up their voter rolls. Again, they're not going to back away from this, which is why I agree with Elon Musk's tweet. Said either we have a red wave in November or America is doomed. I mean, imagine this damage continuing for another 4 years.
It's 10 million people in 3 years, and I'm not accepting any other number. It's 10 million people. The Wall Street Journal today shows that Trump is ahead in 6 out of 7 swing states. And Bloomberg polling shows that immigration is now tied with the economy for the number one issue. That's a killer thing for Biden, who's infirm. So I ask you, Senator Johnson, given that Wisconsin is the only swing state in which Trump is behind, do you think he can win Wisconsin? I don't trust polling in Wisconsin because, of course, ABC News, Washington Post poll in the week before the 2020 election had Wisconsin going to Biden by 17 points. He won by less than half a point. So obviously it's very difficult to poll Wisconsin. What do you think about November this year?
I think it's entirely possible. Again, you look at the enthusiasm of Trump crowds, compare that to Biden across the country, but also in Wisconsin. I think it's entirely possible. Now, it's going to be up to us here in Wisconsin to have an excellent ground game. One of the things I pointed out yesterday when I gave my little speech before Trump spoke is, it was a miserable day in Green Bay. I mean, driving back from Green Bay to Oshkosh was not fun. And that's a perfect example of why we do need to embrace the current rules with absentee balloting, and we've got to bank our votes early. So that's what I told the crowd is, as much as I like voting on election day as U.S. Senator, I've got to vote absentee ballot. But we need to do that. That's what the Democrats do. We can't start election day a couple 100,000 votes behind. We've got to bank those votes so that all of our get out the vote effort on election day is on the low propensity voters. So it's a reality we have to accept. And yesterday was just a perfect day to, use that as an example and say, this is why we need to early vote and bank those votes.
Senator, I want to put you on the spot about vice president because this is one of the few times I think the vice presidential selection is going to matter. And first of all, you need someone who can campaign every day, 24/7, and be relentlessly on message. But you also need someone who contrasts with Kamala Harris, with whom you served. And therefore, my short list is Senator Cotton, Senator Ernst, and former Secretary of State Pompeo. What do you think of those three? Who else should be on the list?
I love Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She's the governor. Again, I like a governor model, or like President Trump, somebody who's run something. People just been in the legislature. I'm sorry, I'm there. They've never been part of the private sector. As a result, they don't have the experience in, knowledge of, or sympathy for the private sector. They've never been part of a functioning organization. So I like somebody who's run something. And again, Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I mean, she's great in terms of communication. I mean, I thought she gave one of the best responses to the State of the Union address, which is not easy to do. I mean, she just pointed out what's obvious. This is a contest between crazy and normal. And every day that goes by, the left becomes crazier and America craves for normal.
Let's go back to that point. I think Governor Huckabee would be a fine choice as well, but she's only been in the job 2 years, and I want her to finish school choice. But let's go back to the border because you are on the committee that deals with that. If they had put a wall in the border bill that Senator Lankford did his best to bring back, he brought back the best bill the Democrats would give, and it wasn't good enough. It wasn't even close. There wasn't a wall in that. I know that the former president brought up the wall again in Wisconsin. Do you think the votes are in the Senate for a wall?
Well, no, not with Democrats. Obviously, Republicans, we voted for it. I mean, I think it's a real vulnerability people like Senator Baldwin have. They voted against just completing what wall we'd already bought and paid for. It was costing us more not to complete the wall than to complete it. And yet Democrats en masse, I think Joe Manchin was the only one that voted with Republicans to complete that wall. So, no, Democrats are absolutely on the record for opposing the wall, which means they want an open border. They caused this. And, the problem with the McConnell, and it really wasn't a McConnell negotiation here, is it gave Democrats the cover they were looking for. That they weren't looking to close the border. They just wanted political cover. And the worst part of that bill wasn't that it excluded the wall. That was obviously a bad part. It was the 4,000 threshold that supposedly gave the president the discretion to stop processing asylum claims. That implied that the president doesn't have the ability to do that already when the Supreme Court says existing law exudes deference to the president. So, again,
I don't think they got cover out of it.
The fact that the president doesn't have the authority, you're weakening that authority, and we couldn't do that.
I don't think they got cover out of it, Senator, because it exposed them as being very, very radical. But let me ask you this. Who won the primary, and did the map expand? Because the map has expanded in Maryland and Pennsylvania for the Senate. Right now, I've got Arizona, Nevada, Maryland, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Montana, and there's one I'm forgetting. But is Wisconsin in play in the Senate against Baldwin? Absolutely.
And again, it will depend a lot on how well Trump does here. Again, this is, we had a third of the votes in this primary as you get during the general election. So, it's not exactly, a real good indicator of it. But at the same time, more Republicans voted in the primary for Trump or others than they voted for Biden. Now, there was more of a bleed off for other candidates on the Republican side than there was for the, uninstructed choice for President Biden. But again, there were more votes for Republicans. We did flip a mayoral seat in Wausau. This is an up-and-coming Democrat individual that, mayor in Wausau, she lost. That's a good indicator. I've got to assess exactly how many school boards we picked up. I mean, we've really been pushing. I call it trickle-up elections, getting Republicans on every line of the ballot, start taking back our school boards with more conservative school board members. So we've had a big push for that really since the Walker loss in 2018. That's worked. So again, it's all about ground game. It's more difficult in a state like Wisconsin, where Democrats can mine all their votes in Madison and Milwaukee and a couple other regions. Republicans have to go throughout the state. We've got to get votes in every little small town throughout Wisconsin. It's a bigger task, which is why we've got to really focus on early voting and a strong ground game.
Somehow you pulled that off 3 times, so I'm hoping they're listening to you. Senator Ron Johnson, thank you for joining me. It's always a pleasure seeing you this Wednesday morning.